Okay, we hit the 10 o'clock hour, so we'll begin. Just wanted to say welcome to everyone, and hopefully everyone was enjoyed yesterday's variety of topics. And I couldn't help but think about the topics on weather this morning. If you turned on your news when you're drinking your coffee, you saw some really bad storms down south, and a lot of the items that they talked about in the afternoon came to mind yesterday. They had tornadoes down there, in case you didn't see the news, in Alabama and some other parts, I think of Mississippi. So anyway, very relevant to what we were talking about yesterday afternoon. And today, this morning's sessions, we have an item on business interruption and the cyber topic. So first, just wanted to welcome everyone, and a few general comments like we always do before the session starts. If you notice on the screen, you'll see a variety of our sponsors, and thanks to all of them for supporting PAMIC, not just on the virtual spring conference this year, or annual spring conference, but also our other educational events. Without them, we couldn't put on the same quality of a program. Also, the education committee, while I'm chair, it takes a whole group to put these on. And I mentioned yesterday, I'll just do it again. There's only a small group of us this year. Chris Ayersman, Hartford Steam Boiler, Kevin Finn, Mutual Capital Analytics, Thomas Brenner, Caldwell and Kearns, Sue Quimby, MSO, Evelyn Schruntz, MMG Insurance, Melissa Tominano, Morgan and Akins. So with all of them, that's how we were able to secure some of the fine speakers that you heard yesterday and will hear today. As always, a CE, if you were attending yesterday, PAMIC's required to have 2 polling questions throughout each session. They're real simple. A box pops up and you just answer it. It's on for a short moment, so that's the purpose, to comply with our Pennsylvania CE requirements. So we just want to let you know that that's important to answer those. I don't know if today or not we'll talk about whether we like Ron Gallagher or not. Yesterday, I think it was a close vote. So if you see that one, make sure you check yes. Anyway, just kidding around. The CPE certificates will be sent via email with the conclusion of the conference, just so everyone knows. And anyone needing general CE, it's important that your license number was included when you registered for the event. So if you're not sure if you put your license number on there, or you didn't put your license number on there, please contact Andrea Strobel at PAMIC.org, Strobel@PAMIC.org, if you need assistance with the licensing number. Because if you don't provide it, unfortunately, you can't receive your CE. There's nothing that we can do about that. So we don't want that to happen. Also, a note about presentations. We get a lot of questions on the chat about, can we have access to the presenter's slides? And the answer is, of course, yes. And the PAMIC group will be posting them on their website, and a link to them will be sent after the conference is over. So I think that concludes all the sort of housekeeping items. And with that, we'll introduce our first speaker. We have Scott Rybny, an attorney from Morgan and Akins, who will be speaking on the general theme is sort of business interruption, but sort of where have we been and where are we going is sort of the theme that he'll be talking this morning about. And as always, you can ask questions, post them in the chat, and we'll try and feed them to Scott, and he can answer them either during his presentation or as he comes upon the topic. So it always keeps it more interesting, I think, with questions. So hopefully you have some. So with that in mind, I'll give you the background on Scott's bio. Scott is a partner and chair of Morgan and Akins Insurance Coverage and Extra Contractual Liability Practice Group. He has devoted his entire legal career to representing insurance carriers, agents, and third-party administrators before trial courts, appellate courts, and arbitration panels in various high-stakes litigations. Scott's practices focuses on matters involving various forms of commercial general liability, fiduciary liability, professional liability, and commercial crimes policy. He has defended property insurers under farm and condominium coverages, as well as handled trade credit disputes, bad faith litigation, insurance fraud, and arson. Scott also represents contractors and construction companies in litigations involving New York's labor law and falls from heights, as well as insureds and professional liability matters. Please welcome Scott. And again, thanks for bringing your presentation today, Scott. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. Good morning, everybody. COVID-19, I'm sure we're all sick of it by now. For those, and I was looking at the attendees, a lot of you I think have heard me speak beforehand to the PAMIC membership, along with I was fortunate enough not only with Ron, but also with some other folks early on. And what I wanted to do today, because there's so much that always happens with the COVID business interruption litigation, but I didn't want this presentation to just kind of be simply a recap of here is what the law is, here's what the policies say, yada, yada, yada. We all know what your policies say, but I think the real question for us is, what have we learned? Is there anything that we can glean from the cases that, as you look back after this presentation at your own companies, your own policy forms, or maybe even your own procedures, is there some takeaway that will better yourself and your companies in the event something like this happens in the future? Because I think what you're going to see in this presentation is we're really kind of at the halftime right now, or as I'm going to call it, the halftime show. So we've learned a lot from year one, and year two is going to really be where I think a lot of the law is going to be made that could impact us for a long time in the years to come, not just with pandemic coverage in the future, but also with other types of losses. Now, I also say that because, as I'm reading this morning and my phone is going off at 4:55 a.m. with an alert, because that's what attorneys do. We've got nothing better to do with our lives, saying about a New Jersey case. Some of you may have already heard it, some of you have not. The only thing I'll say is, for those of you who like Marriott or Wendy's or TGI Fridays, they just lost their business interruption claim in New Jersey, according to a federal court judge. So the big theme here, if there was one that I would start off this presentation with, it's the insurance carriers are doing well, globally speaking, literally, as it relates to winning cases for COVID-19 business interruption coverage. But again, we're just really in the beginning here. And what I want to reinforce is something that Tim said in the beginning, and then I'm going to jump right into the presentation. And that is, if anybody has any questions as we're going along, feel free to chime them in now. That's what makes these presentations kind of fun. It helps keep me on my toes. If it's something that I think we're going to cover in a little bit, I'll let everybody know that and say, hey, give me about 10 minutes or 5 minutes and we're going to be getting to that point. All right. But with that being said, let's get right into today's presentation. Okay. And here we go. There's going to be 3 parts to the presentation today. I already kind of alluded to this. What I'm calling Act 1 is a look backwards. What's happened in 2020 in terms of the litigations? Are there themes or trends that we can take away from that? The halftime show, for those of you who have heard me talk beforehand, I'm just going to run through some statistics, kind of where the litigations are at this point, where insurers stand generally as it relates to the number of suits that are out there. And then the last part that we're going to conclude with here for the final third of the program is 2020 and beyond. What's going to be happening next, and more importantly, how we can better, as I said, leverage ourselves to address claims going forward. Okay, so with that being said, let's start in the very beginning. What were some of the common threads? This is as I was looking through the cases and from the very beginning forward that can be gleaned from the first wave of COVID lawsuits. The first one that jumped out to me was that they were predominantly class action counsel and class action law firms. Why is that important? Okay. I think that's important because when you look at the type of attorneys who were litigating the cases and filing those lawsuits, they're not property insurance lawyers. So they're looking at these cases and framing the arguments in such a way that they would do if they were appealing to a jury on, some big, I want to say like a fatality style wreck, which these claims are not. Did businesses suffer? They did. But these claims and property claims have to be approached differently. Now, when you delve into the complaints themselves, what we found, and this is what I was just starting to allude to, is they were appealing to people's emotions as opposed to property insurance principles. That's why we were seeing, 80, 90, 120 paragraph complaints with citations to Donald Trump and his take on the pandemic and what insurance companies should be covering, citations to news media, different articles that were published in China and all over the world talking about the pandemic, but not property principles. The complaints, and I got the biggest kick out of this as we're looking through those, is from the very beginning, what we saw is that most of them were largely cut and paste from one plaintiff's firm to another. They all mirrored each other very good. So as you could imagine, as one starts to fall, there's going to be a domino effect on that. They weren't geared towards a specific property owner, a specific business, or a specific type of coverage in the policy. There some were. I'm painting this with very broad strokes, but the lion's share were not, because that's what the class action forum is used for. They're painting it with big brushes to try and get the coverage under one umbrella so that they could go for the big payday at the end. And that didn't necessarily turn out to their favor, because as everybody knows on this call, COVID aside, every claim is unique. We say that all the time in training. You say it to your employees. So what happens in one particular claim, same policy language, may warrant a different result in another claim here. But the biggest issue, number one issue out of all the complaints from the first year, with the exception of a small handful, and I could probably count them on two hands, was that they all denied the existence of COVID-19 in the insured property. That was largely fatal to virtually, I want to say every claim, but the ones that have already been decided, the courts latched onto that. And when we move outside of Pennsylvania, okay, and some of these other jurisdictions where courts denied a motion to dismiss, the complaints in those cases, some of them alleged that there was COVID in the building, or the employees in the business were infected with COVID and worked before they showed symptoms of it. Those cases are still ongoing. So I think it's important that we draw the distinction between the two when we're looking at these court decisions and trying to say, okay, can we breathe a sigh of relief? Can we not breathe a sigh of relief? I will say this as well. I think the only carriers sitting here today who can largely breathe a sigh of relief as it relates to Pennsylvania and the shutdown order of the governor here are those with a 1-year suit limitation in the policy. Because governor's order, we're now more than 1 year past that date. And if they're going to try and claim that the order itself is what triggered the business interruption, you have an additional defense right now. You have that suit limitation provision that you can cite to and rely on. And I do want to mention this before going too much further forward, but it's important we remember this for the suit limitation, okay? The suit limitation provision, and again, I'm not looking backwards, it was already done. This is just a general comment. If an insured is not represented by counsel, then under Pennsylvania's insurance regulations, they need to be advised of the suit limitation provision in the policy. No court has said if you fail to, it's a waiver, although we see that argument fairly regularly. So if I was just to stop and say, quick practice pointer, if you're going to deny a claim, make sure you just reference the suit limitation provision in the policy. Now, we all know, if anybody's ever seen, George Carlin and his, old skit regarding the, the 7 dirty words out there. Well, in our case, they're not dirty words, but there are 4 words that really have been driving the litigation here. You know them, I know them, but I just want to take a moment to stop and focus on what those are. Direct, physical, loss, damage. Policies of insurance have those in all kinds of different order. By my count now, there are about 5 different versions of that, although I recently learned of a 6th version recently dealing with a suit by the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to talk about that later because that is on my watch list here, and it should be on yours as well. But courts are taking largely a very pragmatic approach to these terms, looking to their standard dictionary definitions. So we're talking about direct, it's exactly what you would think it would be. It's stemming immediately from one source. A fire happens, fire damages home. Pipe breaks, water goes into house, water causes damage. There's a direct correlation between the two. Physical, that's where we start. Between physical and loss, we start to get a little fuzzier, but again, the courts are largely looking at the physical requirement and saying it's gotta be related to something with the structure itself. It can't be this metaphysical, ethereal component. Just monetary damages, monetary losses don't necessarily reach that threshold. Again, but we're talking the federal courts in Pennsylvania right now. Loss is what loss is. How much an insured has lost something. It goes anywhere from just loss being defined as destruction to the amount by which the cost of something exceeds its selling price, the amount an insured's financial detriment by death or damage. And then we have damage. What's the number at the end of the day? If I was to digest the court cases right now in Pennsylvania where there's been rulings and they've dismissed the insurance carriers from the suit down to a couple principles, here's what those principles are. Okay, first, in order for the plaintiffs to assert, like you say here, an economic loss resulting from some inability to operate their business, there has to be, like I was saying before, some causal relationship to the loss and a physical condition of the property, something physical that changed either in their property, or if you're talking about losses they sustained because of damage to another property, which there are policies, that do give coverage for that. It typically has to be within some radius, but again, we're talking a physical component. What physically changed within the property itself? The other thing that courts are reading into this is this idea that there has to be some temporal component that renders the premises uninhabitable, unusable, or nearly as such, as I say here, for a period of time. And we're not talking a partial closure, we're talking completely uninhabitable. Now, how do the courts get to this point? Most of the decisions, the written opinions where we've got the courts dismissing or dealing with COVID lawsuits in Pennsylvania come from our federal courts. I'm aware of some trial court decisions dealing with this, but I want to focus on just the majority right now, okay? Because those courts based their decisions in large part on a now almost 2-decade-old opinion from the Third Circuit, which is the federal trial court appellate court, in a case called Port Authority versus Affiliated FM. I want to just take a quick moment here and go through why that case is significant for the federal judiciary as it relates to COVID, because Port Authority was an asbestos case. And the question that the court had to wrestle with is, at what point in time does a building become contaminated with asbestos? When does it become uninhabitable? Is it just where it happens to be in the building? Let's say an old heating system that had asbestos fibers sprayed on it for insulation? Or is it when it reaches a certain threshold in the air? Okay. What the court said was, in the first scenario, where it's all in the air, and let me flip it around here, okay? It's not just on the equipment or in the insulation, but you actually have the asbestos fibers proliferating throughout the entire structure. The building has a distinct loss because the function of the building, as the court said, is eliminated, nearly eliminated or destroyed, or it's uninhabitable. But where it just has the asbestos in the walls, the building can continue to function. It has not lost its utility. The court equated that to the COVID scenario, and really the latter parts of that, because the plaintiffs largely hadn't alleged that their buildings were, had COVID in them. The courts have said, well, you haven't lost your function. So this is the easy one, okay? Here's going to be my caveat with this particular case, okay? Even though this decision is 20 years old, this analysis has yet to be addressed by any of Pennsylvania's appellate courts, okay? Let's keep in mind where we are with the litigations that have been going on right now. We have trial courts in Pennsylvania, federal and state, starting to issue decisions on these cases. Those are going to be making their way up on appeal. We don't have an appellate record yet, but we can be sure that this situation is one that the Pennsylvania appellate courts are going to have to address. Now, if we fall into the category, this is where I say, if you have your 1-year suit limitation provision, you're going to breathe a sigh of relief, because if an appellate court does rule on this issue, you're going to be well beyond the time of when an insured likely could be able to bring a lawsuit against your company for a given claim. For those of you that have a 2-year suit limitation, you still have to keep an eye on these types of decisions here, because that could change your exposure going forward. The other takeaway right now from year number 1 is, in about 99% of the cases where the policies have a virus exclusion, those have been upheld. And I say 99% because there are some outliers here. And the outliers deal with whether an insured was led to believe that coverage would exist for these types of loss. They're arguing a reasonable expectations type argument here. Now, for those of you who follow these types of cases and deal with the reasonable expectations, the law, at least as I interpret it and argue in Pennsylvania, a commercial insured is not entitled to a reasonable expectations defense in the policy. And there's some pretty good case law that says that. But the courts, and I'm not sure why some of these outliers are getting to this point where the judges are saying they could have this reasonable expectation argument, but they're not citing to any of the decisions that would give them the legal authority to outright reject it. But for right now, why that's important is because if an appellate court in Pennsylvania says, we're going to consider the insured's reasonable expectation, that could change the applicability of this virus exclusion. Okay, if an insured can somehow make that case to the court. But for right now, and this isn't just in Pennsylvania, but in the lion's share of the cases across the country, the courts are being pretty lockstep with one another and saying, hey, you have a virus exclusion that's pretty solid here and gives you the cover that you need to say there's no coverage for these types of claims. However, let me just say this as well. Just because a policy does not have the virus exclusion doesn't automatically mean there's coverage. Each one has to be looked at individually. And then we always come back to the same first series of questions. Do we have a direct physical loss or damage to the property? It's almost 10:30 here. I'm going to take a moment and just kind of go over what we're going to call the halftime show. But
before you do it, Scott, if I may, there wasn't one question that came in. I was waiting for you to move on from the clauses there. It said, question, do you think the change to the Biden administration will affect BI claims or reception in the legal context in any meaningful way, or is that just more noise?
That's a great question. My opinion personally on that is no, I don't think it's going to do much, because for something to happen like that, it would have to occur at the federal level and be prospective in nature. Like, I don't see the court, even with the current makeup of the federal government, enacting something that's going to look backwards and say, now here's, all of these claims that there's going to have to be coverage for. And even in the draft legislation that was circulated some time ago, it was all looking ahead. It did nothing with the current state of the pandemic and coverage. There was a time where we were watching with somewhat of a holded breath about whether there was something going to happen at the state level. But in Pennsylvania, nothing has come out of the committees that would address this type of exposure and any concern that we might have where there's going to be some coverage kind of hoisted upon insurance carriers, irrespective of these court decisions. Now, let me get to my halftime show here. Remember, I had to pull this up only because I liked seeing all the people in the stands, and like you, I'm sure we miss going out to, restaurants where crowded movie theaters where people are cheering, or sporting events, they hear the noise. I was feeling a little nostalgic. Forgive me on that one. But moving ahead though, where do we stand on the case standpoint? Now, a lot of us out there have been following different trackers. University of Pennsylvania has a pretty good website with some information on there. I pulled this up for a reason, okay, as we're talking about the COVID claims, because I think as you look ahead as carriers and say, okay, what are we going to be projecting? Is our likely exposure going forward? What we see from this graph is that a lot of the cases, as expected, were early on. You know, when you go from the beginning when things started closing down, even through, the end of August. And then we start to see a big drop off here. They don't have the numbers for March yet posted, but I think that's still going to be a trend you're going to see. And the number of claims is going to continue to drop. The number of lawsuits is going to continue to drop. There might be a little bump up in the beginning of March, just as we lead up to Governor Wolf's order. But I think you're going to start to see this as a downward trend. Now, as of yesterday, we're talking just globally here, okay? Because these are numbers that always interest me. Where do we stand with litigations in general? You had almost 9,500 total lawsuits as a result of COVID filed from the beginning to now. 1,663 of those involved insurance. Okay, and again, this is nationwide. This obviously isn't Pennsylvania specific. If we break it down even further and we say, okay, what were the top categories of lawsuits that are being filed? We still have insurance is pretty high up there, but labor and employment has recently overtaken insurance in terms of the number of lawsuits that are out there. This is a good chart, and I like to do this not so much for the business interruption component, but I recognize that there are a lot of people on this call who wear multiple hats, and they may be looking at not just the property coverages, but also liability exposures. So to the extent we see increases in labor and employment lawsuits, increases in real property disputes or contract disputes, which are continuing to rise, that is also something that you should be keeping an eye on, because odds are if you write policies of insurance that touch on any one of these areas, you can still have claims that come in and exposures as a result of COVID. We take a look real quickly at where this kind of the top states are with the lawsuits. Again, as we've seen throughout the past probably 6 or 8 months, Pennsylvania and California are running neck and neck. But what I will say is, compared to 4 months ago when I did this exact same slide, the number of cases in Pennsylvania at that point was roughly 50 cases less than it is right now. So again, we're seeing a downward slope, which is a good thing for us, a good thing for you, moving forward here. Now, let's start looking ahead, okay? We survived 2020, we're now into 2021. What can we expect going forward here? One of the biggest changes that I think COVID has caused, and this is going to be impact carriers across the spectrum here, is we're seeing an increase in the number of federal court judges who are declining jurisdiction. In fact, doing so on a regular basis now, claiming it's not within their discretion to hear the COVID lawsuits. Most of those are out west in the Western District of Pennsylvania. It's starting to bleed over into the middle and then Eastern District as well. This is important to think about for a couple of reasons. Number one, insurers largely like federal courts because it gets you out of jurisdictions that are notorious, who have a notorious reputation as being unfavorable for you. Philadelphia is one that comes to mind immediately. Historically, Luzerne, Lackawanna County are not far behind Philadelphia in that regards. This is going to make it much tougher for us to get out of those venues. Not impossible, but it's going to make it that much tougher. The other issue compounding this, and I'm going to take a slight detour here and just mention this because it is noteworthy, and I was actually having a conversation with someone at an insurance carrier recently about this issue. There was a Pennsylvania Superior Court decision that came down in a products liability case about a week and a half ago on venue. And the court overturned a Philadelphia trial court decision to kick a case for lack of jurisdiction. And what the Superior Court said, among other things, was that as little as a 0.005% business in Philadelphia, just think about that for a moment. 0.005% is enough of a connection to the city in terms of selling goods or products or services that you can be subject to jurisdiction here. That's going to be impactful for us going forward. The second point on this, getting back to COVID, Pennsylvania's appellate courts have largely yet to weigh in on the substantive coverage issues. Okay, the enforceability of the virus exclusion, the meanings of direct physical loss or damage, and how the different iterations of that in a policy may play out. The current makeup of the courts, if you've had any cases up there recently within the past year or have been following the appellate decisions in Pennsylvania, there is no doubt that they have a policyholder bend at the Superior and Supreme Courts. Does that automatically mean that we're going to see decisions out of the appellate courts finding coverage in these situations? No, it doesn't. We have some very excellent attorneys representing the insurance carriers who are going to be litigating these cases, and I've got full confidence in them. But I raise that only because while we all like to cheer at the decisions from the trial court level, there's still a long way to go here. And we may have won the battles, but we're not quite there to say we've won the war just yet. Here's the next thing, okay, I want to talk about. We're seeing an evolution in the pleadings now. What do I mean by that? Let me go back to my comments in the first slide where I was talking beforehand about who was bringing the cases. Remember I said they're not property lawyers, they're not coverage lawyers by and large. Not to say they're bad lawyers, but there's so many nuances with the property insurance world that unless you're knee deep in this on a daily basis, you're not going to have as great an appreciation for. Now, once we get past those initial class action lawsuits, we're seeing more of the, what I'll call insurance lawyers getting involved in the litigations. We still see some of the same allegations before, but the pleadings are taking a turn, okay? We're seeing more allegations, like I said, we're going to talk about here, that focus on the insurance carrier's actions, not just in connection with this particular claim, but with other claims that are out there. Advertising. I can recall as a young associate, this was a hot topic for the plaintiff's bar, where they tried to argue that certain types of losses an insured should get coverage for based on representations that were made by the carrier in certain advertising instances, what they heard on the TV, on the radio. Those claims largely fell apart in discovery when the insureds were questioned, which ad was it, what did it say, and they couldn't recall. But Now what we have a different category of insured bringing a lawsuit. We've got, in many instances, more sophisticated business or commercial entities who are going to be able to say, here's what we relied on more than before. That's going to bleed into this reasonable expectations argument and how courts deal with that. I say this now because, again, as we look ahead and you say, okay, what can we do? I mean, we all want, and we can go on, whether it's LinkedIn, on the internet, and there's lots of advertisements that are out there, advertising your goods or services, advertising your policies. My word of caution would be to make sure you are taking a good look at those and doing so with an eye towards, is this an ad that could bind us in a way that we don't want to be bound if an insured relies upon it? You know, are we guaranteeing a certain type of coverage that would lead to a certain type of claim payment? If the answer to that is no, then you're going to be in pretty good shape going forward. If the answer to that is maybe or yes, or you kind of shrug your shoulders and say, I don't know, well, then maybe it's something that needs to be revisited. I want to talk about this case right now. And the fact that I'm flashing a Philadelphia Eagle sign up, I could imagine if we were doing this in person, there'd be a lot of people. I might even hear some boos out there, some people kind of shaking their head because, you know, maybe they're Dallas fans or Giants fans or Jets fans, or, you know, fill in the name of the other football company or football team. The allegations of this case, though, are specifically noteworthy. And frankly, I want to use the word scary, but they demonstrate that you have attorneys representing the Eagles who have done a lot of homework before they filed this lawsuit. Now, before I get into these specific points, you'll see at the bottom of this presentation, there is a link, okay? I'm giving everybody a link to the complaint. I didn't include the exhibits to it. It's just the complaint itself. I would encourage you to read through that because the attorneys representing the Eagles did a good job of detailing the different policy forms, the ISO forms, over time. So if you are a younger adjuster who's listening in on this, say, 5 years or less in the insurance world, think of this as a good history lesson to be able to say, okay, here's where someone is claiming the forms have been over time. I'm not saying they're completely accurate. And again, they have to be viewed with an eye towards, this is a plaintiff's attorney, so there's going to be a certain spin on that, but it is noteworthy to read. Now, let me get back to the policy here, because what we see with this specific policy is, we're not talking about, risk of physical loss or damage. This particular policy provided coverage for, and I put it in caps here, all risks of physical loss or damage. Query, does the word all change the analysis? As an advocate for the insurance industry, my response is no, because you still need to have that physical loss in there. But it's something new, and in Pennsylvania, they're actually, this probably shouldn't come as a shock to people, but cases interpreting what the meaning of all is. And it is what you would expect when you apply your common sense. It's anything and everything you can think of falls under that umbrella of all. Well, could you then have an instance, if we stop and think about it, where you have something that is, say, less tangible, such as the loss of an ability to use a property falling within this gambit? I could see where a court might come down and say, we need to look into this some more. But point number two, you heard me talk about the advertising. The Eagles are putting very specifically the advertisements from their insurance carrier at issue in the litigation. Here's but one quote that they have from some of the materials they had, talking about the business interruption coverage. The word that jumped out at me is the word indirect here, where they're advertising that this coverage protects against loss of income following a disaster wherever you operate or however indirect your connection to the loss is. That could potentially be problematic for FM if it tries to argue that, well, the Eagles didn't have a direct loss from COVID. There's no direct physical loss. Here's where the case gets interesting, and candidly, I think gets to be somewhat scary for those of you watching right now. In the complaint, counsel for the Eagles went through a significant number of prior lawsuits that FM was involved in, pulled the pleadings, and found instances similar to COVID, or at least they could make that leap to say FM previously took this position in court and won. This decision now is opposite of what they argued before. So again, remember, we're talking a different type of attorney. We're talking some people who are versed in these insurance coverage issues. This is a judicial estoppel type argument that they are setting up right here, right now. But this is also important, and here's where I'm going to stop for a practice pointer. Okay? For those of you on this phone, I think it's very important that when you're looking at arguments being made by your attorneys or positions that are being taken in a litigation, you always have to be cognizant of what the big picture is. You know, are you making an argument that will win this particular case, but may cause you significantly greater exposures down the road? It needs to at least be discussed. I'm not saying you sacrifice one for another, because you certainly don't want to necessarily, lose a case because of something that might happen but we don't know about. But it's at least a discussion that needs to be had. And I think there needs to be that forward-thinking looking, or the big picture perspective on claims and litigations. Here's the other one, and I kind of chuckled at this as I was reading it, but the Eagles found another case where FM argued that an insurer's failure to define direct physical loss rendered the policy ambiguous. That is what the Eagles are going to be arguing here in this case. That's going to be between these, the first slide, or last slide I just showed you, and this one, a hard argument for the insurance company to say, okay, here's why what happened there isn't applicable to this particular claim, because this allegation, if it's true, and I'll admit I didn't pull the actual pleadings or try and track them down, I'm accepting it at face value, is a broad-based legal representation by the carrier or its counsel at that time. That may come back to haunt them here. And if it's true, the policy limits that FM issued to the Eagles are $1 billion. So one litigation beforehand where they made this representation about this provision being ambiguous could turn into a $1 billion mistake here if a court were to accept it. Now, one of the issues that has not been fully vetted yet is, and we're starting to see more of them right now, claims of bad faith in connection with an insurance carrier's investigation of a COVID claim and a denial of coverage. Oops, sorry. I pulled this quote from a recent federal court decision because I think it's insightful for what it says as well as what it's implying here. Okay? If we just focus on the language of this, what the court here said is, okay, because for context, the claim was insurance carrier Continental, you didn't do any investigation. You just got the claim and denied it. And what the court said was, okay, where the claim is based solely on a government closure order and on civil authority orders where there is no nearby property that sustained damage and access to the plaintiff's property was not prohibited, there's nothing to investigate. Coverage does not exist on the face of the claim, and the court said there's no bad faith. But what if we change this a little bit here, ever so slightly? What if the insured does say, when they're presenting the claim, I had an employee who tested positive for COVID. I had the local Department of Health shut me down for a period of time because of COVID in my property. And now I can't reopen, or I could not reopen as a result of that. Or a step further, the insured says, I'm within 1 or 5 miles or 100 feet of this business where they had to be shut down from COVID. If you don't, as the carrier, take the time to investigate those specific facts, I interpret what the court is saying here in the opposite, that could raise a argument and make it for a finder of fact whether the carrier acted in bad faith in connection with its handling of the claim or not. Not saying it's automatically bad faith, but I think it certainly puts enough evidence out there that you would be in the litigation for the long haul, which may not necessarily be the place that you want to be. I mentioned this before as we start to get into the final 5 minutes of the show here. We've already passed the 1-year suit limitation mark, but again, we have to be cognizant of those with 2-year suit limitations, even within the same, insurance carrier, different policy forms, whether you're talking a BOP form versus a CGL form or even a farm form, different forms have different suit limitation provisions. So we have to be cognizant of which one may be applicable for which type of claim here. The other thing, new claims are still possible, okay? We have the closure order that is passed, but there's nothing that necessarily is stopping insureds from still pursuing claims right now for people who may be infected, for closures. I'd like to believe, and from those of you who I've talked to, Those claims have gone down significantly over the years here, or over the course of the past year, but we're still dealing with them. And you still need to look at those, but I think we've got more guidance now than when we did beforehand in terms of what are the specific points. That's not to say we didn't know beforehand, but I think as it relates to this specific pandemic, we're certainly in a better position as an industry, I think, to be able to respond than a year ago today. The other point, and this is something I've been harping on throughout this past year, your policy forms. Hopefully by now, some of you have realized when you look at it, your policy forms are maybe outdated. Now would be a very good time, if you haven't updated the forms, to give some real hard consideration to doing so. Make sure that they are as up to date as possible, because that's the other pitfall here. And we know from ISO, following the swine flu, they made very specific changes in terms of the policy forms they were recommending. There are carriers who have forms that are much older than that they're using. That could be your exposure right there, and a place where the court can draw a distinction if it, were to feel so inclined. In the few minutes we have left here, I want to just kind of open up the floor. If anybody has any questions, we can feel free to type them in now. I see one that just showed up. I'm going to read that out loud for everybody. Tim, I'll steal your thunder unless you
go ahead. No, it's all yours. Go ahead. We'll make sure you saw it. Go ahead.
Yep. The question is, there are many articles out there discussing courts in London deciding to award BI litigation claims. With many of the companies being reinsured by Lloyd's and its syndicates, could there be a trickle-down impact to U.S. state courts making similar decisions? That is a great question. Here's how I will answer that. I think the odds of a decision in England or in Europe impacting how the federal courts here look at those is slim, but we can't rule it out. But if we look back through history and at significant events, whether they're weather events, whether they are terroristic threats, or even other instances of pandemics. Now, granted, nothing to this size, this magnitude, but we haven't seen that crossover from overseas to here in the court system. I think our judges, follow not just Pennsylvania law, but the law as it's been developing in our country, and would not be inclined to say, because this country ruled in a certain way, we now have to follow suit, or we're going to find that to be persuasive. Well, I think we're quickly coming to our close here. So let me end with this. Oh, let me see, did we get one more here? Nope. First, thank everybody for waking up today, joining me on this video presentation. Hopefully before too long, we will be able to do this in person, because I miss seeing everybody. I miss seeing the reactions as we go, and I think that tends to lead itself to a more dynamic discussion. But the takeaways from this, I'm going to summarize these in about a minute here that I have remaining. Insurers are doing good in this. We should take solace in the fact that so many courts are finding in our favor. But again, I want to use the Eagles lawsuit as the cautionary tale that a lot of practices that may not have been at issue before are now going to start resurging again. Everything from advertising to likely training manuals. I expect to see an increase in discovery related to those, what the companies are telling its adjusters internally on how to approach these types of claims. And with that, I see my clock just hit 11 o'clock here. So I'm going to thank you again for having me on this program. If anybody has any questions, my contact information is on the slides. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you in any way I can.
Thanks, Scott. That was a terrific presentation and a lot of thoughtful ideas there about what to do perhaps on some of our forms and how this could actually move in the future. So thanks for that update of where we were and where we're possibly going. Very interesting. So this concludes our first session with Scott. Thank you very much for participating, and we hope to have you back,
Thank
Scott.
you.
We might have this as an ongoing idea. Where are we going? Where are we going? Right. So I like that.
Well, I was, I'll be honest. I was thinking of Dr. Seuss. Everything that was going on. I'm reading it to my 5-year-old, and I thought, it kind of fits within a Dr. Seuss type theme here with everything that's been going on.
I like that. I like that. Yes. So we will we have a 15-minute break for everyone still on the line, and we start up again at 11:15. And the next topic is cyber, equally as important as this whole idea on business interruption that Scott just provided. So we'll log back in at 11:15 and talk to everyone then. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
What's the best way to protect your business? With Donegal Insurance Group. You've poured your energy, your passion, and your heart into this business, and you want it to succeed for generations to come. That's why our agents partner with you to ensure and protect what you've worked so hard to create. Protect your business. Protect your future. Visit DonegalGroup.com/protect to connect with an agent today.
Running a business is more challenging than it has ever been. We know staying competitive and driving your business goals are your top priority. But the cost of compliance is going up, while internal time and resources are going down, all while the cost of an hourly attorney and consulting fees continue to rise. And with those rising fees, you still have limited accessibility and less than ideal response time. So where do you go for answers so you can quickly get back to achieving your business goals? Enquiron is here to provide you with an on-demand, accessible, and easy-to-use solution that you can begin using immediately. It takes just 1 minute to register. Get unlimited support from our client services team. Save an average of $12,000 annually. Oh, and stay in compliance. Sound too good to be true? Well, it isn't. You get unlimited access. Get started today. And suddenly, the path toward compliance isn't so challenging. In less than 1 minute, you can log in or register and be on your way. Stay focused, stay competitive, and drive your organization's business goals. Let Enquiron help with the rest. Our client services team is standing by to answer any questions you may have. Turn your questions into answers.
Electrical failure is a big source of fire, personal injury, equipment damage, and lost business. In fact, fires in commercial buildings cause billions of dollars in damages and injure more than 1,000 people each year. What if I gave you the power to look inside your book and detect electrical failure hazards before they cause serious loss? Loss of property, income, even lives. Would you be interested? Of course you would. But how, you ask? While electrical failures cannot be totally eliminated, they can be significantly reduced by applying an electrical risk management strategy, one that leverages engineering knowledge, data, and analytics to help your customers keep electrical equipment and systems operating efficiently and safely. HSB's Electrical Risk Management Program brings technology-driven solutions to pinpoint hotspots so equipment owners can get equipment repaired before it fails. Advanced data and analytics allow us to evaluate conditions and make recommendations to mitigate potential losses. And because we understand each risk has a unique set of conditions and each electrical system has unique characteristics, we apply a consultative, client-centric approach to understanding your customer's operations. Working together, we can design an electrical risk management solution to meet your underwriting and risk assessment needs while helping your customers improve their electrical failure prevention efforts. For more information about electrical risk management, contact your HSB representative.
Well, Loudon Mutual's been very blessed with a lot of growth. We started out as the mutual fire insurance company of Loudoun County. We wrote policies in Loudoun County. And over the last 10 years, we've gone on a large growth spurt. Our operation has become much more complex. And also the regulatory environment has gotten more complex. Our previous firm was a local firm. They're great folks, and they're very good at understanding small businesses, but they didn't have an insurance background. They didn't understand the specific nature of statutory accounting. And what we were attracted to Brown Schultz was they brought a strong insurance background. Not only did they understand the insurance accounting, statutory accounting, they also understood small to mid-sized firms like us.
I was new to the insurance industry, and Brown Schultz was very helpful in helping me with that transition to make sure that I understood all of the insurance-specific reporting required under statutory basis.
Well, just as Loudoun Mutual is, we are neighbors helping our neighbors, Brown Schultz is very much involved in the mutual insurance community, and they're there to help companies like Loudoun Mutual succeed.
Even though geographically we're not located down the street from Brown Schultz, I've never had any issues being able to connect with them. They're very responsive.
I think one of the unique things about Brown Schultz is the fact that their senior people have such deep experience. Generally, you only find that kind of experience and that kind of expertise with the very, very large firms. But they're small enough that we can work with them, they're personable, we can get in contact with the principals, and they're just a really good partner for us.
I've been most impressed with Brown Schultz with the people. They care a lot about what they're doing as well as about their clients.
I would say Brown Schultz is the right fit and the right balance for companies like Loudoun Mutual. We get the large firm experience with having the small firm touch.
Okay, just checking in. We'll begin in about 4 minutes from the break. I'll circle back in about 4 minutes. Okay, just checking in. We have about 2 minutes before we begin our next session. We have a little less than 1 minute to go before we start. Okay, we hit the 11:15 mark. Welcome back for the second session this morning, which is entitled Cyber Risk and Cyber Insurance, One Step Ahead of the Evolving Threat. Again, we'll be doing the 2 polling questions during this session, and very pleased today to have from Hartford Steam Boiler, our guest is James Hajar, who's the cyber lead at HSB. We'll be taking questions, so feel free to put them in the chat. And James said he can fit them in either during his presentation, or if it comes up in another part, he'll comment that way. Let me give you a little bit of background on James. James leads the cyber practice for HSB's Treaty Reinsurance Division, a leading provider of commercial and personal cyber insurance products. James began his career with HSB in 2015 and is responsible for top and bottom line performance of the Treaty Division's cyber portfolio. In addition, he is also responsible for identifying and helping develop new cyber insurance products. Prior to joining Hartford Steam Boiler, he spent 12 years at another leading insurance company, which included roles in product development, strategy, mergers and acquisitions, and product management. He began his career in commercial banking in New York. Please welcome James, and thanks for participating in the spring annual conference.
Hey, Tim, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it and very happy to be here. When I was first looking at the schedule, I thought this might be a little bit tricky because we're going to be butting up against the start of the first men's national basketball tournament in the last 2 years. and that might put a lot of pressure on me to make sure I get it done in a timely manner. But for some reason, the powers that be decided to move it on to start the tournament tomorrow. So maybe a little less pressure, but at the same time we have lunch. So I'll make sure that I keep it moving, and looking forward to an interactive session with everyone here. So thank you very much. Let me make sure I share my screen, and here we go. So yes, cyber is a space that has been really dynamic since its inception, and inception for cyber only dates back 15 or 20 years. The first coverages started around companies being concerned about data breaches and holding personal information of their customers and their employees, and responding to events where credit cards were infiltrated at retailers and things like that. But it's been very, very dynamic. The last 18 to 24 months in particular have been quite dramatic. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about a number of different areas within cyber. Again, stop me anywhere along the way. And some of the areas we'll touch on today are some of those recent dynamics. We'll talk about the threat of a cyber catastrophe and the concentration and understanding of the possibility of those events happening. We'll talk about product features, what's in a cyber policy, the coverages that respond to these, to the exposures and to the evolving threats. And then we'll spend some time talking about what are small businesses doing to respond to the potential for these events. How do we explain the exposures to them in the proper way? How do we help everybody within the value chain of understanding the risks associated with being connected to the internet and running a business? We'll touch on personalized cyber. So it's an evolving space, and carriers are getting into the space in earnest in order to provide solutions for individuals, because as anybody that's got a smartphone in their hand, their TVs and all their other devices are now connecting to the internet. And so there's real exposure for individuals as well. And there's a growing and flourishing personalized cyber market out there. And then we'll talk about the future. What do we expect coming in the next year, 2 years, and beyond. So we'll spend some time in each one of these little areas. Okay, so first, recent cyber dynamics. And so it's been a heck of an 18 or 24 months in the cyberspace. Things have moved fast since 2004, 2005, when cyber really started to be a line of business that insurance carriers were getting into. But the last 18 months, 24 months in particular, have been very dramatic, very fast moving. And really, there's a couple of major things happening in the space that I wanted to share with you today. First is extortion and ransomware. And for those that haven't heard of this before, basically, if you have a computing system and you're a business, ransomware is a type of computer virus. You'll hear people use terms like malware, extortion and those types of things. But ransomware is a type of computer virus that it comes into a computer system, it finds its way in through the internet, and it encrypts your data. It encrypts your operating system, and it basically locks you out and then demands an extortion payment. So there's varying types of ransomware, different software packages that bad guys are using to exploit companies and extort them. And so it's really spiked in the last 2 years in particular. So we'll walk you through a little bit about what's happening in that space. In reaction to that, the market's hardening, and carriers are taking rate. They're taking other underwriting actions. They're really responding to this kind of explosion in ransomware that's been happening over the course of the last 2 years or so. So we'll talk through a little bit more about what carriers are doing to respond to the event. And then the market really has shifted from one that's been price driven and coverage driven, with cyber being new and carriers looking to find their way into the rising premiums and the growth in the marketplace. Commercial insurance has been somewhat flat for some time. And cyber represents an opportunity to grow premium and get into a new line of business. And so carriers for the last several years have been racing to get in, and coverages has expanded very quickly. Pricing has been targeted in order to attract some of that market share. And really, with what's happened in the last few years, that time has kind of passed, and we're going into a space where carriers are looking at this line as something that there is significant risk. And so the kind of wild west of carriers rushing into this market, there's been somewhat of a pause in that. And then last, we'll talk about cyber cat and the potential for cyber catastrophe. There's been 2 events that have happened within the last 6 months or so. One's called the SolarWinds hacking incident, December of 2020. And then just this month in March, Microsoft Exchange was hacked. So we'll talk about those 2 events, and then kind of the response from the industry, what reinsurers are talking about, and we'll touch on some of those topics as well. Okay, so first, just to shed a little bit more light on what's happening with ransomware. And these are just some stats that we've pulled. A 7-fold increase in ransomware as reported by a company called Bitdefender that aggregates some of this information and understands what's happening in the space. We work with a company called Coveware, that's second block, a third higher as far as the amount of severity, the amount of the extortions demanded. And those numbers look high to themselves, going from 84,000 to 111,000 as an average demand. They work with companies that are much, very large companies all the way down to small companies. So there is a big difference on what's happening with large corporations and government agencies versus what's happening with small businesses. But it just goes to show you that not only is it a frequency issue with ransomware, but it's also a severity issue. And that's having kind of a cascading effect when it comes to insurers. That's playing through in insurance results. The other stat we have on here is that a major carrier had a 239% increase in the amount of ransomware claims that it saw from 2019 to 2018. We don't have full year 2020 results in a lot of these, so but just keeping an eye on what's happening in the news and what carriers are talking about, and others that participate in the space, whether it's forensic IT firms. Ransomware kind of across the board has become something that is a very much a focus. And then in response to that, here's just some more points that increases ranging from 15 to 25% are becoming more common. Price has increased about 10.5% on average. Some of the major carriers have come out with public statements. Chubb overhauls its cyber appetite with smaller lines and rate demands. Beasley stressing account by account underwriting approach and citing the hardening market, and AIG introducing ransomware co-insurance and sublimits. And so this is just showing that carriers, and these are some of the major players that are in the cyber space, reacting to what's going on from a ransomware perspective. And then there's definitely a dynamic though, and I kind of touched on this, that these carriers are playing in spaces that are probably writing $1 million plus limits for corporations. And there's definitely a different kind of market that's happening. The space that we play in, I think the space that you support with small business, small insureds that are writing limits of $50,000, $100,000 in limit. The experience there is much different than what it is at the higher end of the market. Though there will be pressure on small businesses because there's no immunity to ransomware. It comes into small businesses as much as it does large businesses, actually probably more so in small businesses because there's a lot more small businesses than large businesses. And if you have an internet connection, you're vulnerable. If you're running software, you're vulnerable. So it's something that the whole insurance market around cyber is reacting to in relation to ransomware. Okay. And so you can't go into a presentation these days without talking about COVID. And The COVID effect in relation to cyber is something that we're watching very closely. From our business perspective, it hasn't been so impactful to this point, although it could very well be, and we're still watching a few key areas. One big thing is that all of us are working from home these days, or most of us are still working from home. I know some folks are starting to get back into the office. So with working from home, what kind of effect is that going to have on performance in relation to IT people being able to do their jobs remotely? People are, all the IT folks that have traditionally focused on security as their job, the IT security folks are now taking on roles of IT administrator, right? All of our companies have had to figure out ways to have their employees work remotely. So the focus has been kind of moved off the ball of security into more administrative functions. So we'll see if that plays out. And if we're going to see some losses resulting from the fact that people are having a tougher time keeping their eye on the security ball, and delays in responses with that. If there is activity out there, if hackers and intrusive software has made its way into systems, will that play out? Are we going to discover a lot of things that have happened when we all get back to the offices and IT departments are being able to focus once they get back, and the responses related to that? Will there be ample resources to respond to some of these events if and when they're found? And then the criminal element that's perpetrating these things, they're not standing still either. Oftentimes there's when there's catastrophe and challenges out there, you see frauds being perpetrated during times of crisis, right? So we've all heard of the scams related to if there's a hurricane pouring through an area, there's scams in the aftermath, people being taken advantage of one way or another. And the same holds true for COVID. I get a lot of emails from our field partners with articles talking about the next COVID scam that's happening. So if you go and try to sign up for a vaccine, or is there somebody that's trying to figure out how to scam you? Or if you're trying to find your refund check, sorry, not your refund check, your stimulus check, there's bad guys are trying to find ways to interrupt that process and try to divert you. So this is with COVID, we'll see again that the FBI is reporting a 4-fold increase in scam attempts over the course of 2020 versus 2019. Critical industries are often targeted during these types of events as well. So healthcare, food supply, we've seen those industries attacked during the course of COVID. So a lot to keep an eye on in relation to what's happening with COVID and with cyber more broadly. Okay. And so the threat of a cyber catastrophe, what are we really talking about here? And maybe the best way to talk about what could happen in the cyberspace is to kind of go through a couple of events, recent events that have happened. And in December of 2020, there was an event called the SolarWinds attack, and it made the news in a big way. It had some lots of geopolitical conversations going on, where SolarWinds is a company that's a software provider, and their software helps large companies and government agencies with their networking. And so what's being reported is that the Russians found their way into this software company, and they installed malware virus into the software and put it as part of a patch update. So with software that you own, you often, if you're working in your company, you're going to get something from your IT department. Make sure you download the latest software so you're up to speed and secure. So these hackers found their way into that software, and so when the customers went to download this latest version, it came along with a what's called a Trojan, for like the Trojan horse. And this malware was embedded within that update. And so it went out to at least 18,000 of their customers. And again, those are large corporations, federal agencies, and boom, 18,000 of customers are infected with this virus. And so it had gone on for almost a whole year. So it was only reported in December, but kind of after a forensic review, it was revealed that these hackers had been in systems for almost up to a year. And so it was something that was a real eye opener for folks. The goal of the hackers was really espionage, right? So they're looking in large companies, they're looking in government agencies. They were 9 or 10 federal agencies were impacted with this. So there's great concern from a governmental perspective, from a national security perspective that this has happened, but it also opened the eyes to the broader cyber market, that these events, that you can have a wide scale event impact a broad swath of people because of these types of potential attacks that can hit a large number. So it was something that was an eye opener. What we're dealing with now, and this just was announced a couple of weeks ago, that Microsoft Exchange was hacked. And so on March 5th, media started reporting, and Microsoft Exchange is something that many of us know. It's emailing and calendaring software. A lot of our companies use that type of software. And so this event will impact hundreds or thousands, tens or hundreds of thousands of people will have impact. Companies will have impact from this event. And so it's one that will likely cut more into the types of businesses that we insure and you insure within your companies. It's everything from mom and pops to smaller government agencies, schools, municipalities, you name it, dental, doctors' offices, consultants, accountants. The Microsoft Exchange is a widely used package across industries. So this is still playing out. Cyber insurers will see an effect from what's happening here. And then, the hackers, it's being reported, this group is out of China, that not only are they able to access the emails, but because of the type of the hack it was, they're able to implant other virus through the networks of companies that are impacted. So there's potential that this could get, it could go beyond just an email hack. It can get into servers. Could they possibly put ransomware on the servers of the companies that have been impacted? And so that's a real concern. So if the goal goes from being espionage to destruction and extortion, these events can get rather large. So that's what the industry is thinking about, and these kind of events really bring that to light as potential for what's possible. And then we need to be thinking about these accumulation events. And we do a lot of modeling at HSB. Carriers that participate in the cyberspace, they're trying to understand these potential for accumulation in throughout the course of their business. So carriers use accumulation modeling for their pricing to understand the aggregation of risk, and then how to manage their capital. And so, carriers know about accumulation in property and other lines. Cyber is a new space, so it's somewhat more difficult. It's a newer space, and just this slide talks a little bit about comparing cyber cat modeling versus natural cat and what the differences are. And natural cat modeling is not the easiest thing in the world, but it's been around for 30 years. Carriers understand what a hurricane is, right? You understand wind speed, you understand construction type, you understand the path of the storm and how it overlays with where your business resides on a map. And carriers can do lots of different scenario testing related to that. In cyber modeling, it's new space, and there's not a full level of consistency across carriers on how they're doing modeling. There's no tried and true system. One carrier's accumulation modeling might differ from another one. So that creates kind of some challenge there. The other, I think, real key differentiator with cyber catastrophe modeling versus natural catastrophe, a hurricane is coming up the coast. It's coming up the East Coast. It might go into the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to impact that swath of land where it hits. For cyber, there's no geographic boundaries or limited geographic boundaries. A cyber attack that hits Microsoft Exchange could hit everybody that has that software anywhere in the world. And so the geographic limitations of a natural catastrophe event are kind of somewhat static, if you will. Whereas for cyber, it can go very widespread very quickly. So there's a little bit more uncertainty there. And so that's something that carriers are dealing with, and that reinsurers are also considering as well. And so the last kind of piece of what's happening in the space is that reinsurers are also reacting to what's been happening. And so just like the primary carriers are seeing some adverse experience because of ransomware, the reinsurers are also seeing the same. And the events like the SolarWinds attack, the Microsoft Exchange attack, is really putting a focus on underwriting, on understanding accumulation. The capacity that's out there in the market, there is still capacity for cyber, but the questions being asked at when carriers are seeking reinsurance, it's a lot different than it was a couple of years ago. And the scrutiny on underwriting discipline, on asking about modeling, on asking about how we're pricing, those types of questions are more and more of a focus for reinsurers, and how they deploy that capital and understanding their own cost of capital has really changed over that time period. So it's a space that has been dynamic for 15 years, and it's been very dynamic for the last 2. Okay. And so, we've talked a lot about, I hope I didn't scare everybody to death too bad, but it's not a one-sided coin. There's a two-sided coin to this, and cyber insurers like ourselves and companies have been taking action on this since it started. Since the dawn of the internet, companies have been spending lots and lots of money on IT security. Insurers have been moving as fast as possible to try to compensate for the activities of the bad actors in the space. And cyber products have really evolved tremendously in the course of the last 20 years or so. The industry really started, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, in relation to data breaches. And what that means is personal information of people is disclosed. So really it started with large retailers having credit card information stolen, hacked into in some way, and those companies having to notify people. State law started requiring, like, this is pretty bad to have your customers' information impacted. You have to notify them. So state laws popped up that said data breach response laws that made carriers, made companies notify folks. And that really created the need for financial backing behind this. And the insurance industry was there to support companies that had to do these notifications, because some of those costs can really get very large when you're talking about notifying 50,000, 100,000, or a lot of people. So the industry has moved very quickly, and now coverage has expanded to cover computer attack, the viruses that I mentioned, loss of income in relation if your computers or systems are down, cyber extortion. We just spent a lot of time talking about breach response. So again, those data breaches. Fraud has become a very big issue as well. So we call it at HSB, we call it misdirected payments. So if somebody is tricked within the office and sending out money, we would have coverage for that. So if a bad actor hacks into an email system and sends an email that looks like it's from somebody within the organization, asking them to pay an invoice or send money to a certain party, if that money goes to the wrong, is it sent by a fraudulent actor, we would cover that event. And so that's been happening a lot lately. The sophistication of the bad actors has only grown over time. what used to be very easy to spot as far as a fraudulent instruction where the message might have been written in broken English has changed very quickly to be very, very, very hard to spot in certain cases. And so we see a lot of misdirected payments go out. Data loss, companies, every company from big company to small companies, if they don't have their client list, they can't access their data on their laptop, they're in trouble just like a big company. And so, being able to help a company get their data back, unencrypt data, and the forensics that go into that is what's part of a cyber policy. And then also all the liability coverages that go around with interacting online and running your business. There's a lot of liability around this. So data breach is a good one to talk about. If you have an event where you have to notify your customers that their personal information was stolen, you might get a lawsuit that says, hey, I had somebody opened up a bunch of credit in my name, and you might receive a lawsuit from that. Electronic media liability is another liability coverage often in a cyber policy, which basically protects against something happening online. You might a small company might post something on their website that they shouldn't post. That's not their trademark. They may say something inflammatory against another party and catch a lawsuit from that, and the cyber coverage would respond. And then identity recovery. Small business owners, their personal identity can be impacted. So if somebody is looking to try to infiltrate the company, they might go onto LinkedIn or another source, try to understand what's happening with, who owns the business, who holds the purse strings of the business. They might do some due diligence. They might be able to find out about the owners of the company and try to really steal their identity to commit fraud. So there's coverages for a whole host of threats that are out there in the cyberspace. Okay, and then access to cyber coverage is really quite easy for small businesses. Really, if you're looking for limits of $50,000 or $100,000 in coverage, most of that coverage is sold in the way we sell it, which is an endorsement based. It attaches very easily to a BOP or a GL policy. And so it's easy at the point of sale for an agent to be able to tack on a cyber endorsement. And so for low limits, it's very low friction. It happens quite easily. As you go higher with limits, then there's more discipline following that exposure to higher limits. So you'll likely face a questionnaire if you're looking for limits above, say, $100,000. You might be there's website scanning technology that carriers are deploying now to understand what kind of software you have that interacts with the internet to see if they can find a little bit more about your security posture as a company. But really, for a small business to get cyber coverage, it's quite straightforward if they're looking for lower limits in coverage. Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about what small businesses can do, what we can do as insurance professionals to help them out. And I think really it's still a matter that every small business doesn't think they're going to be impacted. We do a lot of surveying at HSB, and we know that small business owners don't think it's going to be them. I'm just a small business. Nobody's going to come after me. And I don't even need the coverage. And we hear from agents and others that we talk to, well, how am I going to sell a $200 cyber policy on the back of a minimum premium, $400 BOP? That's not going to work. And I think to myself, a $400 BOP is probably, an office occupancy. Maybe it's in a small accountant, maybe a dental practice and so the exposures, it's just maybe somewhat unfortunate that the exposures for a small minimum premium BOP, if you're putting, GL and property on, what's going to be more impactful to that small business? The danger of a slip and fall or a property issue at that company, or if the accountant's laptop gets stolen or impacted, or or they receive a ransomware demand. All their data is encrypted. All the tax files that they're working on are encrypted. And so we need to do a better job as the insurance industry in talking about these exposures for small businesses, because it's really anybody that's got an internet connection that's trying to run a business, big or small, is vulnerable to these types of things. The risks are always changing. The bad guys don't need to necessarily be targeting small businesses. If they're running a certain software, there's viruses that the hackers can use that basically goes out and trolls the internet and looking for these weaknesses within company websites that can find its way into software packages and very easily put a ransomware demand on it, encrypt all the data. So it doesn't have to be a targeted account, and we see it all the time with small businesses. Okay, so this is just another little visual that is trying to show the need of where these things can happen, right? We've seen the point of sale system, right? If we're starting on the left-hand side, the point of sale system for retailers and restaurants, hackers find their way into those systems. And we just had a somewhat of a many claims come through from a company that there's a point of sale system. This group really had customers of about 500 or 1,000 customers, but they're a point of sale system. So the credit card company, the credit card machine that you have where you swipe your credit card at a restaurant or any retailer, this company deployed about 1,000 of them. They had a ransomware attack come in and get deployed out to all 1,000. And we saw, more than a dozen out of the 1,000. It was basically a small operation in the Midwest. And the retailer, and in this case, mostly restaurants, are on the hook for that, because when they sign up for that point of sale system, there's all sorts of information and responsibility in the agreements that they're signing with the MasterCards and Visas of the world, that in that point of sale system, they have to uphold security. And that means changing passwords and things like that. And if there's a breach of those systems, they could very well be on the hook. And so the point of sale system, their computers, servers, paper files, all those things have personal information, their employee bases. And so, employees are one of the most vulnerable groups, right? So the hackers can send links that have embedded malware in it. So if you click on something, you might get a virus because of that. Even the company's vehicles. So the data that gets, if there's, maybe larger entities, but the data that resides in some of these vehicles that's out there, or even if the truck driver has, a list of information about people that they're delivering to. So there's lots of vulnerabilities within small businesses that people just really aren't aware of to this point. So it's kind of up to us to help educate them on that.
James, if I can interrupt the questions. One is when you're talking about small business and trying to point out to their weaknesses, a great point about like the whole credit card or merchant agreements, right? A lot of them, I don't think even know that they're going to, at least my understanding is when the credit card is deemed fraudulent, the question is who ends up paying that loss? And most of the time it's not the legitimate customer. It falls back on the small business owner. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah, a lot of times. I mean, it depends on the merchant. It depends on the credit card company. Sometimes, if somebody steals somebody else's credit card and goes into a merchant and buys something, it might depend on the instances that if it's happened before, the credit card company might not believe that merchant, or they should have known, or did they check? Did they ask for a form of identification? So it might depend on that. But really, what we're talking about when I'm expressing here is that the point of sale system in general. So every credit card that got swiped there, say a restaurant has 2,000 or so people that have gone to it, hackers can go into that point of sale system and extract all 2,000 people's credit card numbers. And so, you'd think that's a problem for MasterCard or Visa to figure out, but it's not. It's a problem for that retailer to figure out, because they've signed an agreement with those entities that they're gonna, protect that system. And if they have a shortcoming, if they didn't put a password on it or something like that, that allowed that hacker to get in there, they're gonna be on the hook for all the data breach notification costs and issues related to perhaps lawsuits from those people coming through. Again, this company that we saw in the Midwest, it was a small company, just a small vendor that deployed these 500 or 1,000 point of sale systems. They had a real big incident. And so that wiped them out. That was the end of that company. And so, in all those, they were on the hook really to help those small businesses try to figure out how to notify all those people. They just didn't have the resources to do that. So that's what can happen.
Okay, we have another question that was typed in here. Has cyber insurance become industry standard for certain businesses? Is it based on size? As you have alluded to, I've seen many small businesses reject the notion of obtaining cyber insurance. And at what point do you believe cyber insurance will be standard required insurance for all businesses, regardless of size or complexity?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot to unpack there. I wouldn't say that it's standard yet, right? There's a lot of room in this industry for market adoption, right? I would say that most insurance carriers have a cyber solution, right? I think that, we talk to a lot of carriers and they have cyber solutions in one form or another. It might not be the most up-to-date product in the world. It might just cover, data breach or a certain part of computer attack, but they'll have some sort of coverage. But what's not happening is that there's not full adoption in small businesses. We estimate that it's probably 30 or 40% of small businesses that might have some sort of cyber cover. And I think if you really think about it, and the likelihood of an incident happening, a BOP coverage being triggered versus a cyber policy being triggered, and what would be more impactful for that business, I just don't think the understanding of the exposure is there yet. But as time matures, and again, we're only a 15 or 20-year-old industry, as time matures, I think small businesses are going to start seeing this as a real need across the board. I think carriers are going to start seeing it as, hey, our clients are going to need this. Agents, the whole value chain, I think, is going to start appreciating more and more that these cyber threats are real. And some of these large, wide-scale events that happen, I think will push it all the way through. But at this point, I don't think it's standard for sure at the insured level. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, here's just some of the things that are happening. And this slide is entitled "What Employees or even individuals, what we can do at the personal level when we're looking to protect ourselves a little bit, beware of phishing." And so, what died off for a little bit has come back and with some aggression, right? And phishing is just really think of clickbait. You get an email that you click on that you shouldn't, and it unleashes a virus within your computer system. And so these are getting more and more sophisticated. Some companies, ourselves included, they do phishing campaigns and they try to get employees to click on links and then try to educate them that way. And they get very sophisticated. We had one that said, click on this if you want to understand. This was back when we were in the office. Click on this to know the right evacuation route to get out of the building in case of fire. Something that you might want to know, right? So you click on it, that's clickbait, right? And then boom, if you had clicked on that and it was a piece of malicious code, it would infiltrate the system and cause the company a great deal of harm. So things like that are still, very scary for companies to deal with. Phishing is voice phishing, right? So getting calls that you think are somewhat strange, and bad guys are looking for information to try to trick somebody into giving them credential information, let's say. So you might get a call that says, "Hey, I'm calling from the IT department and I need your email and password. It looks like your computer is running a little bit slow. I'm going to try to help you fix it." So that's a lot. We're seeing that a lot now, where bad actors are pretending that they're working for the company and trying to gain access that way. Keeping software up to date, very important. The latest patches and updates. Every software company is trying to make sure that they keep up to speed and fixing holes in their software packages and doing those patches. And so keeping your software up to date is a key thing to do to make sure you're keeping the bad guys at arm's length as much as possible. Backing up your data, very important. And when we deal with ransomware, first question that we ask is, do you have backups? And the paths are quite different. If you have backups versus not having backups is a big deal. If you have backups, your life's going to be a lot easier. If you don't, then you're dealing with, you might avoid paying a ransom if you have backups. If you can come back up to speed very quickly, an IT vendor can get you up to speed if you have backups. If you don't, you might be paying the ransom. You might have to deal with maybe even not getting your data back if you do pay the ransom. So keeping backup data is very important. And then password protection. This is very important as well. So all of us have probably had to we have to update our passwords very often. It keeps security tight. So if information does get put onto the dark web or infiltrated in some way, the fact that passwords are updated quickly and often means that the password the bad guy found that might have been somewhat dated doesn't work anymore. So very important to keep password protection. For companies, I can get to the next one. So for companies, it's about training their employees, right? Making them aware that there's risk out there and that keeping employees knowledgeable about what's happening from a threat perspective is important. Firewalls, and a firewall to me is a fancy way to say what's between the company and the internet. So making sure that there is some security between what a company is doing and what the internet is out there being able to get in. Administrative rights. This is who has access to what within a computer system. Not everybody should have access to people's personal information, to HR records, to health information and the like. Not everybody within an organization should be able to root around in different parts to get into the proprietary information of companies. So making sure that there's definitely lines in between what people can have access to, because a disgruntled employee can cause a lot of problems if they have rights to kind of everything. Securing the Wi-Fi, I think that's somewhat straightforward. There's a lot of companies that still run Wi-Fi maybe without passwords. So keeping security around the Wi-Fi. And then if you think something's happened, you might as well go explore that really quickly, because the quicker you can get to a resolution of an issue, the better off you're going to be. So if you think you've been hacked, then you got to act on that. Okay. So really quickly, and Tim, are we on till 12:15 or till? Or
yeah, that's correct. 12:15.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
I got a couple more minutes. So with personal lines cyber, this is a space that has really been growing very, very quickly. What started out only, we think we were first to the market back in 2016 with a personal line cyber product. Just in the course of the last 5 years, the market has really taken off. I think as larger carriers start to develop their personal line cyber products, and you'll see there's a few large carriers that are out there with a personal line cyber product, but you'll see more and more come into the market in the course of the next year or 2 years. As you see those large carriers entering the market with a personal line cyber product, the rest will likely follow suit. So I think within a few years, personal line cyber will be really a topic that we'll see many, many carriers on. I think there's going to be very strong growth. The same kind of issues that impact businesses also impact individuals, right? We are all connected. The dawn of the internet, as much as it's brought the possibility of connecting with friends, of doing commerce, checking your online banking, looking at sports scores, you name it, it's also opened up the world that we live in, which is online crime and extortion, fraud. We're seeing a lot of cybercrime in relation to the personal line space, and you know, risks are emerging every day as well. Little video visual that we use, and this is just kind of to say the picture. Hey, being connected to online, and you know, if any of us look at the screen time that we use every day on our phones, we know that this is true. Maybe unfortunately too true for the amount of technology that we use. That, you know, within 60 seconds, there's 448,000 tweets, 3.3 million Facebook posts, 500 hours of YouTube video uploaded in a minute, 3.8 million Google searches. And so technology is part of what we're doing every day. I think the market is really adopting this because people understand it. Like, wait a second, I get technology. Some other coverages, and you know, we're a specialty insurer. We do equipment breakdown. We do, you know, for homeowners, we do home systems protection and service line and things that are within the home. But you're more likely, I think, you're more likely to be thinking about your cell phone, your connected TV. You might be more willing to be thinking about that than, you know, the drain out to the sewer that's under your front yard. So people kind of understand it's ubiquitous to think about the technology. And so I think the market has really responded to that. You know, we do a lot of surveying. HSB is a very technical company. We try to understand the risks before they come out. We've understood from folks that people have had their information stolen. They've been victims of online fraud. The number of devices people are connecting grows and grows every single day. You know, people are concerned about being victims of viruses or cyber attacks. If you talk to somebody about losing all the pictures that they've ever had, that they put on their computer, people freak out. So, you know, it becomes real when you put it in those types of terms. And I think, you know, what's happening in our homes is changing every single day as well. The amount of devices that we expect within a home in the next couple of years is going to be over 20 connected devices to the Wi-Fi. 20 sounds like a lot, but if there's 4 people within the home, 4 smartphones, a few tablets, a couple of TVs, all TVs are becoming smart TVs, garage door openers, entertainment systems, you get to 20 very quickly. And with every one of those devices, there's vulnerability. So we look at those, we call those attack vectors, and they're exploited. You hear these horror stories about, you know, hackers hacking into baby monitors and all sorts of crazy stories like that. But these connected devices represent potential areas of exposure as well. So the coverage that's responding to this, there's a lot of similarities between what you see on a commercial policy, but there's also some unique things that are happening in the personal line side. So computer attack, we kind of went through that, extortion, home systems attack. There's coverage on policies in personal line space that if your connected devices are impacted by a virus, there's going to be coverage. So if you have to have the Geek Squad come out and reinstall your entertainment system because there was a virus, then there's coverage for that, right? The big one that we're seeing coming through in our claims is fraud. And in personal lines, fraud is a little bit different. It's not about kind of misdirecting money like it is on the commercial line side. It's more about being defrauded, being tricked. And the big ones we're seeing are sharing economy and social media scams. Social media, we kind of all get that. Facebook, Instagram. The sharing economy, I use that term a lot. Sharing economy is when you're transacting business with somebody online. Airbnb, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. We've paid a lot of claims where people have gone to book their vacation online. They go to one of these sites, Airbnb, VRBO. They're interacting with somebody. Yep, that week's available, and I'll give you a couple $100 discount if we go off the site. I won't have to pay the cleaning fee, and I won't have to pay the Airbnb fee. So instead of $2,500 for the week, let's just call it $2,100. Send me the check, and we're good. That check, you send the check, it gets cashed, and lo and behold, you figure out either before you get there or even worse, when you get to the beach, that house doesn't even exist, or the house that you just negotiated wasn't the house of the person that you negotiated with. And so we've paid a number of those. Facebook Marketplace scams, those are what we're seeing. We're also seeing claims related to computer pop-ups. Hey, your computer's running slow. Call us here at Microsoft and we'll help you fix it. And so people, those pop-ups, I've seen a number, I've seen one on my own computer that was exactly what happened. And people call them, and then, you know, there's very sophisticated kind of fraudsters on the other end of that asks to use remote desktop protocols. And so just like if your help desk, if you have a problem with your computer at work, there's the IT people can remotely get into your computer. The same holds true with your personal computer. The bad guys find their way in their computer. Let me see if I can help you. And they get in there, and then they start a kind of different types of scams. There's fraud scams, there's extortion scams, lots of things can happen from that. So the coverage response to those events. Cyberbullying is one where the person is intimidated, bullied. There's coverage in relation to helping that individual through that experience. Most people think of their children in those scenarios and being bullied at school. It pays for things like tutoring if they have to be taken out of school, counseling costs, legal expenses if to help stop the bullying. So a lawyer to help you through the process. Identity theft, we talked a little bit about that. And even data breach. So even if you're volunteering as somebody within the school, you're volunteering as a coach, you might, or the church, you might have some health information or personal records of people. If that information's lost or impacted in some way or hacked, you have responsibility to notify those folks. So the coverage is quite diverse. You know, there's something in there for everybody, I think. You know, some people I talk to, you know, they get it. They're thinking about their maybe elderly parents. They're thinking about their kids. They're thinking about themselves. They're worried about somebody stealing their identity and getting into their 401k plan. So there's coverage there for everybody, I think. Okay. And
we
so,
have we have two more questions if it's
sure.
okay. Yeah. So the first one that was sent in: do you think business lenders will mandate cyber coverage or even offer the product as a fully insured product or as a warranty type product?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, what we're seeing so far play out is that certain industries are starting to require that their vendors have cyber coverage. Like we're seeing it in construction, where you know, in order to be a subcontractor within a project, let's say the general contractor is saying that you have to have a cyber coverage. You need $1 million in cyber coverage in order to participate in this project. And so people are asking more and more questions like that. And organizations are asking more. We've seen it in construction. We're seeing it in healthcare. We're starting to see agreements between parties about levels of cyber coverage, where risk would reside in relation to personal information. People are very concerned about you know, what's happening with the personal information of their customers these days. One expansion that modern day cyber policies have is this whole notion of privacy. And so a typical data breach coverage a few years ago would protect you as a company. If you had a data breach, you notified people that there was a data breach, somebody sued you in relation to that, right? It was fairly straightforward. But what we've seen in the last few years, and you know, all of the large tech CEOs have been paraded through Congress in the course of the last few years talking about how are they handling personal information? How are they handling your and my personal information? What are they doing with that data? So liability coverage, personal or privacy, it's more about privacy now than it is data breach. So the protection now goes beyond just data breach response. It goes beyond handling of information. If you have a lawsuit related to how are you handling personal information, the coverage would respond in those events. So, you know, privacy has really come to be top of mind as far as what people are doing with data and information. It's a great question.
Yep. Here's another one. It's a little longer, but I'll go through it. You had mentioned that $1 million in coverage is relatively common for commercial cyber policies. However, it is not hard to imagine many cyber breaches or ransomware attacks well exceeding $5 million for even standard incidents due to forensic analysis and sheer number of state required notifications to be sent. Is the $1 million popularity due to a genuine belief that the amount is adequate in many cases, or just simply a result of risk versus cost balancing of carriers and insurers? I hope this makes sense.
It does. That's a thorough question. So thank you for whoever wrote that. I think $1 million limit is a threshold that to get $1 million limit is somewhat straightforward. You're answering probably 8 or 10 yes or no questions on getting that limit, and you'll have access to that for in pretty short order. Carriers like us, it's almost it's a more seamless process. With especially what's been happening lately with ransomware, getting above $1 million limit, very doable, but many more questions. You're answering upwards of 30 questions probably. They're going to do an understanding of what your company is. You're going to get all sorts of IT related questions about your security stance. Carriers are likely going to do an outside-in scan of websites to make sure that this technology allows to understand what kind of software is being run by that company, what their operating system looks like. So the access to above $1 million is difficult. For extortion in particular, carriers are scared because these demands are going up. We've seen extortion demands going up. And so being able to get a $5 million extortion limit, because there's nothing really preventing a bad guy from asking for 5 million. Why not? And these are negotiated now, right? We work with vendors, and there's a negotiation that goes on. They might start. They're gonna understand what kind of organization you are. They're going to be doing their due diligence on you. If they know that they have a ransomware deployed within your system, they'll know what a reasonable demand is and what a not reasonable demand is. And carriers are making note of that, right? Putting out a $5 million extortion limit is going to be challenging. And it's going to be expensive, right? So anything below $1 million, easier access, not as much underwriting, and somewhat more straightforward for insureds to get. I hope that was.
Yeah, thank you.
Answer.
I think we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, and so a little bit of the future. I think what we'll see is continued growth in the cyber market, right? All these events, although it creates some uncertainty for carriers, the growth is still going to be there. The worldwide growth we anticipate being upwards of $11 million next year. $11 billion next year. And those are probably low estimates, right? We are looking at data that's reported worldwide. The US market is estimated right now between $2 and $5 billion, but it's only going to grow. There doesn't seem to be anything slowing it down other than, some of the challenges, but carriers are still, getting into the market. Companies are understanding more and more that there's a need for coverage. So I think we'll see continued growth. Just some of the things that we're following, and we talked a lot about this, but targeted cyber attacks on MSPs. And MSPs is managed service providers, fancy way to say software companies. So these hacks that where bad actors get into software, push it out to lots and lots of companies. That's a challenge and something that we think about. Sophistication of ransomware. These have gone to be quite sophisticated. There's lots of different players in the space. The amount of different strains of viruses that we see is only growing. The level of sophistication is growing. Small businesses are in the crosshairs too, right? With vulnerabilities to software. Larger companies have IT resources, smaller companies don't. And so as the large end of the market hardens their defenses, the small end of the market looks more vulnerable. It's an easier target. So we think we'll see more activity from a loss perspective on the small end of the market. Governance and legislation, there's a lot happening in that space. State governments are looking to make changes relative to, just like there was data breach laws, we're seeing states start to impact protection laws around security as well. So that's only going to grow. And so it's a very, fast moving space. It's going to continue to be dynamic, I think, over the course of the next few years. I hope I was able to share some of, what's been happening and really enjoyed the time. So is there any other questions out there?
I don't see any more in the queue, and thank you for answering them, and thank you for participating at the conference. You gave us a lot to think about and many things to probably keep us awake at night, so thank you for that. But hopefully the future is a little better than, like you said, some of these scary events that are happening now, but it doesn't look like that may be true. But thanks again for participating. We hope to have you back, maybe another PAMIC event, and this is very enlightening. So we reached our 12:15 stop point. We'll be breaking for 45 minutes for lunch. We'll resume at 1 o'clock with Charlie Kingaller's emerging issues session. And there'll be a new link sent to everyone on email, just like we logged on to this morning session. You do the same thing, of course, this afternoon. And if you have any problems, contact Brittany. And then now we can all log off Zoom. And thanks again, James, and thanks for HSB allowing you to speak. Terrific.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody.